after telling great stories about why Kleiner Perkins invested in Genentech and Amazon and Google and all these multiple 100x of returns and how great John Doerr is and how great Kleiner Perkins is, we will still conclude with some big mistakes Kleiner made over the years. And after covering Sequoia and Benchmark and now Kleiner, I can confidently say Kleiner's misses are worse than Sequoia and Benchmark's misses. And not necessarily worse on a potential dollar outcome basis because, Benchmark missed Google. So that trumps all right there. But they really missed some big wins, as we'll see. And so what's so frustrating about these mistakes is that they shouldn't have been mistakes. They weren't really about price, like when Benchmark missed on Google, or some uncontrollable factor, like when Sequoia missed on Facebook for Facebook's relation with Sean Parker and that whole history about that. In fact, all three of these investments either fit right into a thesis that Kleiner Perkins had, were very similar to companies they backed in the past, or the last one we'll talk about was another big and bold idea, backed by a great mission that fit the typical Kleiner investment, like we talked about with Google. So this is a pretty frustrating section, more frustrating than the last 2 weeks. I don't know why I get so annoyed. It's just whatever. But so first we're going to talk about is Tesla. And so this investment is a head scratcher for many reasons. First, it's Elon Musk. And, obviously now Elon Musk of 2023 is a lot different than Elon Musk of 2006. I mean, he wasn't this, once in a generation entrepreneur yet. SpaceX wasn't, a multi-$100 billion company. Tesla wasn't a near $1 trillion company. But he had led successful companies in Zip2, which he founded and led, and PayPal, which he was CEO of for a short time after merging with Max Levchin and Peter Thiel with his company, X.com, ironically. But he still had a reputation as an ambitious genius capable of solving difficult problems. Now, these are the entrepreneurs Doerr historically backed. The Googlers and Bezos were unproven founders, unlike Musk, who was already proven, but they were geniuses capable of solving difficult problems, which is what Doerr loves. Doerr loved geniuses capable of solving difficult problems, just like Musk, except Musk also had that experience of being a founder and running large companies. And so I'm very surprised that Doerr didn't feel the same conviction he felt when backing Bezos, Larry Page, and Sergey Brin. Maybe he was growing old of the ambitious ideas as Kleiner was beginning to enter his slump in 2006. It was not really getting as many wins as they used to. Maybe Musk was just different then than he is now, but again, somehow he misread Elon Musk, which is already quite the mistake. What's more interesting about this is that Tesla was perfectly aligned with Kleiner's thesis at the time. Kleiner Perkins was transitioning from the focus of their partnership to almost strictly green tech investments, which was very outside the norm for venture capital. John Doerr just became obsessed with solving climate change and put all of Kleiner Perkins' focus into that. In about 2006 to 2010-ish was when they were really focused on this. What's crazy is Tesla's mission was literally to make electric cars the most affordable cars in America, much like is going on right now, which would severely decrease the number of internal combustion engine vehicles on the road. That was his mission then. In 2006, this was already written out. There's a famous picture of it just written on a piece of paper of his 3-step plan to build an expensive car, make money so that he can build an affordable car for all of America, or excuse me, all of the world to drive. But instead of backing Musk and this big idea and his engineering expertise and operational experience, they went with the only other electric vehicle company they could invest in at the time, which was Fisker. You may have not heard of them because they've been bankrupt since I think like 2014. And Kleiner went with this Fisker because the management team had experience in the automobile industry, which, can be one of the most difficult industries to operate in, due to regulation, especially when you're disrupting the whole thing of these entrenched incumbents like, Ford, GM, and on, trying to completely disrupt them with a new type of vehicle that they could not compete with. As we see now, they still can't really build practical electric cars at the price of Tesla, whatever, sidebar. But so the Fisker team had experience in the automobile industry, which, Musk obviously did not have. But again, he was certainly capable of building a well-designed car. I mean, he was an engineering genius. Kleiner Perkins loved to back engineers. And just like we saw with the Amazon investment, Bezos wasn't from a retailing or web development background. I mean, he worked at a hedge fund before starting Amazon. But John mentioned how Jeff was just so bright and someone he wanted to get in trouble with, which they were certainly going to do because they were disrupting an entire industry by bringing all of retail online and undercutting all their prices and so on and so forth. And Amazon has had its fair share of regulation issues and threats from other businesses. So Bezos not coming from a retailing background was probably a good thing because he wasn't initially handicapped by knowing what he could and couldn't do. And so maybe Musk and Dor just didn't vibe as much as Dor and Bezos did early on. I mean, like I said, Elon Musk today is much different than Elon Musk was in 2006. But again, this is certainly a big miss and one that's really hard to understand why it happened. I mean, I'm very surprised that they didn't invest, having seen the opportunity. I mean, Elon Musk was, like Jeff Bezos, willing to take less money for Kleiner Perkins to invest. I think he had an offer for $70 million valuation, but was willing to take a $50 million valuation with Kleiner Perkins if John Doerr joined the board. But unlike Amazon, John Doerr didn't want to join the board of Tesla, and Tesla went with the other investor. So the only plausible explanation I can think of as to why Kleiner Perkins didn't invest in Tesla is just because it would have been unfair for Kleiner Perkins to have invested in Google, Amazon, and Tesla. 2 is enough. That has to be the reason. Next, we're going to go into VMware. And this investment is also interesting. By the way, if you don't know VMware, they just sold to Broadcom for something around $61 billion, I'm pretty sure. So big company, very successful company, kind of a low-key company if you don't know a lot about cloud computing and data storage and so on and so forth, but big company. And so this investment is also interesting because Kleiner had invested in Juniper Networks and Sun Microsystems, which were different companies, but were similar in the sense that, all 3 of these companies, VMware, Juniper, Sun, worked with data visualization and data storage and cloud computing. They were all in that world. And so VMware should have been right in Kleiner's wheelhouse, having come out of successful investments, very successful investments in Juniper Networks and Sun Microsystems in the 90s, in the 80s. The only reason I could find why they passed was due to, like all great companies, a high valuation. Like I covered in previous episodes, a high valuation is the classic reason why investors don't invest in future successful companies. We talked about Sequoia passing on Salesforce because of high valuation, and Benchmark passing on Google because of high valuation. I mean, if anyone knows of any studies that go into if companies that were passed on because of high valuations, just what that success rate is, because I'm starting to see a trend that companies that had a high valuation that were passed on by premier venture capitalists tend to turn out successful. So if there's any numbers behind that, maybe I'll jump into that, because that seems like there's some type of arbitrage there. But anyway, so I don't need to go further into the specifics about why I just don't like the excuse of passing because of high valuations. I've seen that too many times that I don't like that one. But what's even more frustrating about this pass is that Kleiner Perkins' partner at the time, Vinod Khosla, who we talked about earlier, had successfully co-founded and ran Sun Microsystems to the multi-billion-dollar juggernaut it became. So he knew this industry well. As we said, Sun Microsystems was pretty similar to VMware. And he reportedly had very high conviction on this investment and was very adamant that they invest despite the high valuation. I don't know, what happened internally. Perhaps no other partners agreed with Khosla and he was outvoted. But as we touched on with Google, with John Doerr's inkling of Google, the best investments are non-consensus and right. Also, Vinod Khosla likely knew more about the industry than any other partners at Kleiner, having worked at Sun Microsystems, direct competitor of VMware. So if he's lobbying for this investment so strongly, then, as the subject matter expert at the firm in this domain, he should have been given the green light to invest. So this is why I favor smaller partnerships that don't require, a vote. Like we touched on with Benchmark. Any partner, if they have conviction, they can lead it. Rather than bloated firms like Kleiner Perkins, who's 12 partners with too much discussion and pandering around potential flaws of an investment. I personally believe that non-obvious investments are the best investments in venture capital. And I think a lot of people would agree with me for that. Therefore, the partner with the most domain expertise should be given the trump card over those with less domain expertise. Now, this is how you get non-obvious and right. So, in my opinion, it's easy for me to look back on this, and I'm not a venture capitalist, so this could be naive of me to say. But in my opinion, if you're at a partnership and there's 5 or 6 partners, and one of them is extremely gung ho about making this investment, and he or she is the domain expert in this field, they should have the trump card over the rest of the 5 partners to make that deal. That's not obvious and potentially could be right. And if that investor knows more than the others, he or she knows something that they don't, which is why he or she is getting more conviction. So, as you may be able to tell, this one frustrates me a little more than Tesla. I mean, the Tesla one's very frustrating, but this one's also very frustrating. And frankly, could be a reason why Vinod Khosla, who was a top VC, in the 90s at Kleiner Perkins, could be why he left to start his own venture firm, Khosla Ventures, which would begin to certainly overtake Kleiner Perkins throughout the 2000s of just success and returns on invested capital after leaving Kleiner Perkins just a few years after this decision. So the last one we're going to cover today is Robinhood. So once again, like every company I try to expose in the anti-portfolio section, since no VCs want to talk about this, I couldn't find too much information on why they passed. What I do know is that they were pitched at both the Series A and the Series B, but passed both times. They did ultimately invest in a late-stage growth round, which valued the company at $5.3 billion, but I'm still considering this an anti-portfolio investment since they missed at the more notable stages, the A and B stage, where they could have earned a lot more money on this investment than just 2 or 3xing it. Whatever they did, they could have multiples of 100xed it. But so yes, anti-portfolio company. Now, like I said, I couldn't find information, but I'm assuming they passed because Kleiner Perkins was kind of in shambles at this time, unfortunately. It was 2014 when they first met with Robinhood, and they were coming off this hangover of just an unsuccessful, I mean, successful in the sense that they did return capital and returned a decent number on the fund, but unsuccessful in the sense that Kleiner Perkins was the premier venture capital firm before 2006 when they started going all in on green tech startups. And while that's a good virtuous cause to back, they were way too early on it and just did not have a lot of successful exits. So they didn't return, that top 1% capital that they were expected to return as a premier venture capital firm. And they were just coming off a gender discrimination lawsuit that one of the partners within Kleiner Perkins filed against the firm. And while Kleiner Perkins won this lawsuit, it still just looks bad. So Kleiner Perkins wasn't in a good state. So perhaps they just weren't as focused or had enough conviction to invest in these bold, big ideas like Robinhood's of democratizing investing. I think that they were probably just way too focused on just investing in green technologies and virtuous investments that they just missed a lot of these consumer tech or internet based technology companies throughout the 2010s that were so big. I mean, this is when Uber and Airbnb and all those companies came out, Instagram in that 2009, 2010, 2011 area, and they kind of shifted from early stage to just late stage growth rounds for technology companies like Robinhood, with one of their former partners, Mary Meeker, leading that charge, who did great growth investing. But again, Kleiner Perkins should be better than that. They should be able to identify and invest in these companies at the earliest stages when they see them. So I'm all for, developing theses. It's a good way of attracting founders to your company because they know what you're looking for and, what your expertise is in. But I'm not a fan of investment theses when it becomes the only thing you do. When you only meet with companies that follow that thesis, or else you will omit far too many exceptional companies. I believe personally in having several theses for, several different industries or broader thesis that can be applied to multiple industries. So Kleiner Perkins seems to have changed that today to being a little more broader with their beacon. And I suppose Kleiner Perkins probably learned that lesson the hard way from missing Robinhood and this incredible wave of consumer technology companies.